talking about CockroachDB and Amazon Aurora. There's a lot to cover, so it looks like it's the top of the hour. I'm just going to go ahead and get started. Again, we have a lot to cover. I do ask that you use the Q&A function as part of Zoom. I do have a couple colleagues with me, Sai, Ron, and David. They're going to be off camera, but they will be helping me out with the Q&A function. Hopefully I'll cover a lot of, or answer a lot of your questions, but it's a broad topic, a lot to get to, so feel free to use that Q&A. They'll help out as they can. Again, on the side, a couple other just housekeeping things. In addition to the Q&A piece, we will have a survey at the end. Please stick around for that and fill out the survey. And then the recording will be made available after the call. So with that, quick agenda. We're going to cover CockroachDB on AWS, the partnership there, Aurora overview and architecture, a lot to cover there, especially with some of the recent announcements. CockroachDB, when do you choose, which offering, kind of a if this, then that, and then Q&A. Again, I'll call it again, Q&A. Feel free to throw that in the Q&A section. The chat will be unavailable through the presentation, but Q&A will be open. We've got people on the side that will be answering questions. Very, very quickly about me. I'm a solutions engineer at Cockroach, based out of Austin, Texas. I've been at Cockroach a little over 2.5 years and have been lucky enough to work with a lot of different companies, kind of your startup hyperscalers up to some of our larger financial institutions, banks. So I've kind of seen a little bit of everything. Definitely come across AWS and Aurora all the time. Was just at reInvent last week. Been to reInvent the last 3 years with Cockroach. So fielded a lot of questions there, and that's kind of the point of this webinar, is take this to a more a broad format, answer a lot of the questions we got at the booth. And I think by the time this one's done, I'll be pretty exhausted talking about Cockroach at AWS, but at the end of the day, this is a fun topic for me. I enjoy learning about these different databases. So thanks for taking the time. Also figured real quick, maybe the best way to get to know me is show you a screen grab of my typical social media feed. It's a nice healthy mix of college football playoffs, if you follow that, and then databases. This is a fun thing for me to read about, not just on Twitter, but play around with the different tech. Did want to quickly call out Mark Brooker is actually part of the DSQL team, did a lot of talks, a lot of blogs on the topic. So shout out to him. He put out and his team a lot of good content, fun for me to read. But also a good segue into my disclaimer for the webinar. I don't work at AWS. I'm not an AWS engineer. I love learning about this stuff. I love playing around with it, learning new things. But at the end of the day, not an expert on AWS. And depending on the day, sometimes I don't even feel like an expert on Cockroach. So I do believe both these are strong databases, fun to learn about. We're going to cover a lot today. It's just scratching the surface. I've done a lot of research. I would say this presentation is high to medium level, but if you have any questions, I'll answer them the best that I can. And then final call out, please use that Q&A function. I do have team members that'll be monitoring that, and we will have Q&A at the end. All right, quick partnership call out, and just CockroachDB on AWS. I know this is a competitive webinar, but at the same time, they're a strong partner of ours. We actually are on the AWS marketplace. Since I've been here, I've seen people deploy Cockroach managed service on AWS. I've seen people run Cockroach on EKS or Kubernetes service. Really cool use cases, even on AWS Outposts. You can self-manage Cockroach on AWS, really leveraging a lot of their different tools that have been around for a long time, and kind of add to the benefit of Cockroach. So whether it's multi-region, multi-AZ, there's a lot of cool things you can do with Cockroach on AWS, which is kind of why we have that strong partnership. I also wanted to call out here the The SCA, or the Strategic Collaboration Agreement, recently announced. That was actually just a few weeks ago. We announced that partnership. Again, really just highlighting kind of the partnership between our two companies deploying Cockroach on AWS. And then before we get deep into the architecture, I thought it was important to talk about the data infrastructure challenges, some of the things that we've seen at Cockroach over the last 9-10 years. Not only data infra challenges, but database challenges, obviously, specifically. That's the space we're in. And I think this is pretty interesting because these are things that we've seen, but it's clear with some of these recent announcements from AWS that they're seeing a lot of the same problems, problems that are very difficult to solve and not easy to solve. So what are some of those? Scalability is a big one. Sometimes it's very vague. I'll talk to somebody and they say, we're having scale problems. I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean exactly? A lot of times it is a write scale problem. They're facing write bottleneck challenges. Maybe they've scaled a vertical instance as much, or instance vertically as much as they can. Now, what do we have to do? Manual sharding. It's not a fun time. It's a very common problem, whether you're in the cloud or on-prem. We've seen this over the years. Limited availability, downtime for some people could mean, even minutes, millions of dollars, right? So how do we solve these high availability challenges or requirements that folks have? Whether, the high RPO, RTO, zero data loss is a hard requirement for many of the people that we work with. So how do we attack those challenges? And then lastly, high cost and complexity, whether you're running in the cloud, on-prem. Some people have requirements for both. Some people need to be cloud portable. There's a lot of different things, a lot of different requirements, depending on the company. And these are challenges that I see, that we at Cockroach see all the time, and I know AWS does as well. And that gets us right into the solutions. Like how do we start to solve for these problems, especially the more complex ones? So it's kind of a lot on the screen right now. That's kind of how I felt a little bit, learning some of these things over the past few years, some of the new announcements that have come. There's kind of a lot going into even if it's not AWS, just out into the market in general for databases. There's a lot out there. Obviously, today we're only focusing on AWS. And even within the AWS ecosphere, we're really just focusing on relational databases. This is not even all encompassing of things like DynamoDB, for example. But quick call out of some of the AWS solutions. Most of us should be familiar with RDS. It's a compatibility of many flavors: Postgres, MySQL, SQL Server, kind of you name it. This is their cloud offering on dedicated infrastructure for these different database solutions. So adding a little bit of cloud offering there to those solutions, but at the end of the day, this is kind of their baseline database solution. And we very quickly evolve into Aurora, which is the main topic of today's discussion. And within Aurora, there's kind of this umbrella of offerings. And that's where even, over just the past week or so, it's added another piece under that umbrella of Aurora, really adding more cloud kind of feature sets to your database, how you manage it, all those fun things. So Aurora specifically is only compatible with Postgres and MySQL. That infrastructure uses dedicated and serverless infrastructure technology. And for a long time, it was a single writer instance only. We'll talk a bit more about this. Again, this slide is pretty high level. Then you've got Aurora Global Database, which is actually Postgres only. That's kind of starting to tell the multi-region story a little bit in an active passive form. We won't highlight this as much today. I personally haven't seen it as much in the field, but it is an option. Aurora Serverless has been around with V1 and V2 now for the past few years. And then, of course, I know there's a lot of questions rolling in around Limitless, DSQL. DSQL, of course, being more formally announced at reInvent last week. Limitless going GA a few months ago, being announced at last year's reInvent. So I think what's interesting here is, even before I get into these technologies, of just the fact that AWS does keep adding to their suite of tools, suite of Aurora solutions, because I think they've found the same thing that we've been seeing, is there's gaps in maybe standard Aurora or standard RDS where maybe it's not meeting the high availability that some folks need, or the scale that some people need. So obviously, I think this is where a lot of our questions are going to come in, and that's totally okay. I think these are going to be fun to unpack. So Limitless, just quick flyover, is Postgres only today, actually only on serverless infrastructure as well, but really starting to introduce this concept of multiple writers via shard groups into the Aurora suite of solutions. Again, we'll dive deeper into both of these today. And then DSQL, again, very recently announced in preview, also Postgres serverless, but taking Limitless into more of like an active. This is not a sharded solution, really an active, starting to tell the HA story a little bit. So again, this is a lot. We're going to cover as much as we can, and then we're going to tie it into Cockroach. Keep the questions coming in the Q&A. I do have my colleagues hopefully answering questions. It looks like they are as quick as they can. And then we will leave time for questions at the end as well. I saw, again, a question about the recording that will be made available at the end too. All right, so I did want to start with the Aurora, what I'm calling basic architecture. I might use the word Aurora like standard. I think this is an important place to start, because this is what I see by far most in the field. This is the most battle tested. I think this is still going to probably be their most common, use of Aurora over the next couple of years. So I did want to start here, and we'll dive into Limitless and DSQL. So basic Aurora, standard Aurora, whatever you want to call it, actually has a single write endpoint that takes all write requests for the database. Then on top of that, you can actually add multiple read-only endpoints to increase read throughput, and also start to tell a story about disaster recovery. Those read endpoints could be added in different AZs. They could be added in different regions. And so this is something that I've come across many times since I've been at Cockroach. Again, this is pretty battle tested. I have really only good things to say about Aurora. It's a good solution. I've seen it plenty. And then the storage layer as well. This start to spread across multiple AZs. Typically, what I start to talk to people about with this solution, it mostly comes back to the single write endpoint, or the single write instance. The couple issues that I come across, and I think AWS has picked up on as well, is one is a vertical scale limit. If you start to scale this write instance up and up and up, you can get pretty big. You can get excellent write throughput, but the reality is some people need more. And if you need more, you're typically looking at adding an additional Aurora database or cluster and start sharding manually your data. So again, that's not fun to do. Nobody really wants to do that, but plenty of people hit that vertical scale limit. And then number two ties into the high availability story. That write instance does only exist in one AZ. And so if that AZ goes down, or if there's issues there, you're looking at a kind of a failover process to a read replica, which incurs it will incur downtime. So those are some of the highlights I see with standard Aurora. There's, again, so much to unpack here. I know we want to get to the other things, so we are going to do that. But still the most common. I expect this still to be the most common over the next couple of years. Again, as they're more battle-tested solution. This is also, you see serverless start to come in over the last year or so with these read replicas, can be serverless or dedicated instances. All right, so now getting into some more of the fun stuff, some more of the recent announcements over the last year or so from AWS, things that I've had fun learning about. I'm sure we have questions on. Again, I'm no expert here, but happy to field those questions as they come in. Postgres Limitless. I call it Postgres specifically because this is only Postgres, at least last I checked today. So only option there, but this is really AWS, I think, starting to tell or answer that problem for multiple writers. I talked about standard Aurora has the one writer, you can scale vertically, but what happens after? So Postgres Limitless, I think, starts to help tell that story via a sharded solution. So what we've actually got here, this whole piece here is actually your Aurora DB cluster. What's nice is they actually do give you one DB cluster endpoint that's going to connect to routers. What do routers do? Well, they do about what the name describes. They kind of route your SQL connections or commands to shards. And these shards are, again, if you're familiar with things like maybe Citus or Vitess, this is more of a sharded solution, sharding your data across these different shards to start to tell the scaling of write story. So this was super interesting solution. I believe this was announced at last year's reInvent, and then recently went GA at the end of October. So I personally still have not seen a lot of this in the field, just because it's probably early adoption, still people getting familiar. But the main takeaway here is this is definitely a sharded solution. What do I mean by that? If you have a table that requires a high scale for writes, you actually need to go in and define shard keys or a couple columns to shard that data based off those columns, and those will be spread. So that's not the only option. There are standard tables, sharded tables, and reference tables. Standard, that table is just going to exist on one shard. Sharded, of course, is spread throughout. And then reference tables will actually exist on every single copy or every single shard. So a little bit different ideas there for the table types. And then you'll notice familiar Aurora storage with 3AZ durability. This is all we're going to spend on the architecture. There's still a lot to go through. I know we're just scratching the surface here, but main takeaway, Limitless, kind of a sharded solution. Some good use cases, I think, or actually this is, I think, copy paste directly from Aurora documentation. So that's always a good place to start. This works very good for distinct subsets of data as those tables grow very large. This is good use case potentially for sharding in general, whether it is kind of a limitless solution. I know Vitess has done some really cool work on large sharded tables, potentially growing very fast. Again, really focusing on the high write throughput for particular tables. There are limitations though, or I guess things to consider when going a sharded database route. The main thing I think is just the setup and the maintenance. Really going into a solution like this, you need to think about what tables need to be sharded, what is the shard key or keys that I can use. What is that going to look like over the next couple of years, 5, 10 years? Are those keys going to remain stagnant? Will they ever need to be updated? Because that could cause problems. So really, I think potentially migrating into something like this would be a bit more difficult. Maybe if you're starting out with a fresh application, potentially a little bit less hairy in terms of thinking about how to set up or define those shard keys. But to me, I think that's the biggest one, is just there's more, I think, upfront legwork and kind of things to keep in the back of your minds when when defining these shard keys, especially. A big limitation, at least to me, when I initially see this, is the fact that it's single region only, at least from what I gleaned from the documentation. So even if this does solve maybe your high write throughput goals in a single region, there's potentially a multi-region or disaster recovery story into other regions that I think would need to be told or is missing here. Again, things are always changing. I don't work at AWS. They could announce this tomorrow, but it's just something I noticed today, the single region only. I did find it interesting that it was serverless only as well. Serverless, I do think, is cool technology. We have our own serverless, offering as well. But for Limitless, it actually is serverless only, no dedicated infra. There are various DML and DDL limitations. I'm not going to go through those. Again, these things are always changing. I'm sure they're working on those improvements. You can go read up on them yourself. But this is from what I see. Limitless, again, main takeaway, sharded. Got to think about shard keys when going with something like this in a single region. All right. I know there's plenty of questions here. This was the big announcement at reInvent last week. I was at the booth. We got people coming up to us almost immediately. Aurora DSQL. If you have not heard about it yet, DSQL stands for Distributed SQL. So if you're not familiar with Cockroach, we'll use the word distributed plenty here in the next few slides. But this is their brand new announcement. Again, it is in preview right now. I'll say that multiple times, in addition to the fact that I'm not an expert. This solution's in preview. Things are always changing. So I want to keep that preview asterisk on all these slides as I talk through it. Again, this has been fun to learn about for me. I think one of the initial reactions from a lot of people I talk to at Cockroach is, this is cool stuff. We're excited to learn more about it. And it's also a validation of what we've been working on for the past 9 or 10 years. AWS saw these challenges that we've been seeing, and there needs to be solutions like Limitless and DSQL that start to address some challenges in the market that maybe standard Aurora was not. So this is a very high-level architecture diagram. DSQL or Distributed SQL starts to tell more of the high availability story, I think, that standard Aurora was lacking. What you're seeing here is a multi-region DSQL cluster where you have, kind of two Aurora DSQL clusters, and then this witness region down here. This witness region is actually doing quite a bit of legwork in this solution. Again, this is a high-level architecture diagram. There's a lot of material that's been put out that goes into the medium lower levels. I'm not going to have time to touch on, but this is actually made up of quite a few actually different microservices in the Aurora DSQL cluster. So there's a lot of pieces of this puzzle, but again, I think this is really starting to tell their HA story. So this actually is serverless as well and multi-tenant. So I think their ideas, start to tell the story around scale and high availability. It's going to be a lot of the same buzzwords that I use in just a second and talk through with Cockroach. So it's kind of cool to see. I think there's a lot more to come through here. I'm sure there's questions about this. I will do my best to answer them at the end as we kind of go through this. So, all right. So again, I'll call out for the 50th time, DSQL is in preview. And so a lot of the things I'm going to throw on here are subject to change over the next month, year. I personally am excited to keep learning about it. But in this preview release that actually is available now, you've got just 2 regions and then that witness region. So this is in the US. It is serverless and multi-tenant. which I found, again, pretty interesting. It seems like they're really leaning into the serverless architecture. Multi-tenant meaning, other users on this infra as well. It's not dedicated only to you. This line here, optimistic concurrency control. This is a little bit deep of a topic for today, but just know that this is kind of a decision around how to attack concurrency in DSQL. It is quite a bit different than Cockroach and some other things I've seen. Kind of ends up looking like Postgres repeatable read. So again, this is a deep topic. I'm sure we'll have more to come if you really want to learn more about some of these deeper items. But there are some trade-offs here, especially as you get into potentially high write concurrency, especially iterating over the same key space. Some interesting limits. I noticed that there are a number in DSQL. It is Postgres only today. I mentioned that at the beginning. Some things to call out is just one database, 10 schemas today. Again, subject to change, but just a couple I picked out that I thought was interesting. And then the 10,000 row limit within a transaction, inclusive of indexes. So if you have a transaction that is impacting or inserting, updating around 10,000 rows, and that inclusive of indexes, that would be a limit. I cannot go over that. And then the number of unsupported, I guess, Postgres features or objects is a little bit more extensive on DSQL than it is in Limitless, and especially in like RDS or Aurora. So, again, I call this out because this is how it stands today. I'll always be kind of checking in, see how they progress. I know this is subject to change. And yes, Aurora DSQL is serverless only today and multi-tenant. I see that question come in the chat. All right, so I know this was a lot of info on AWS. I'm going to switch into the Cockroach side of it now. How are we different from some of these new announcements? Keep the questions coming in the chat, and I'll have my colleagues look at them, and I'll do my best to leave some time at the end as well. All right, switching into Cockroach, we still position ourselves as the trusted global database to run business critical, mission critical applications for the world's most important businesses. So again, you'll see this word distributed SQL, DSQL, distributed SQL. We position ourselves as a distributed SQL database here at Cockroach. And what a lot of buzzwords on this slide, and we're going to get into how we do it, but the main takeaway for me is, as a distributed system, our goal since really day one, we've been around almost 10 years now, is to start to solve some of the problems we saw at the beginning, which is, limits with scalability, whether it's vertical scale with write throughput or whether it's horizontal scale across AZs or across regions, or even across data centers, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, all the buzzwords. Those are real problems that we see and that Cockroach can attack. So the scale piece, and then of course high availability. Always have to remind a good amount of people at the booth when they ask, why Cockroach, why the name. It really, I think the biggest thing for us is the high availability. Folks that can't afford downtime, and where every second of downtime means dollars and cents, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars. So high availability, surviving AZ outages, surviving regional outages or DC outages, whatever your use case might be. And then we also are Postgres compatible. So again, similar to kind of the AWS, it looks like they've also leaned into becoming Postgres compatible for DSQL and Limitless. So we had the same mindset when we first started out. You connected Cockroach with Postgres syntax to use Cockroach. So we're going to immediately hop into the architecture. of how we do it at Cockroach. And again, with the time left, we're going to breeze through these pretty quickly. Always encourage people, afterwards to reach out if you want a deeper dive on any of these topics. But I think the main thing, and usually the first thing that I mention at the reInvent booth or any conference I'm at or anyone I'm talking to Cockroach is any node can read and write data. I say node, this is a CockroachDB node here. We've got 3 nodes in this example, and 3 nodes will make up a CockroachDB cluster. This is actually showing one logical database across these nodes. And every node is a reader and a writer. And that's usually one of the first things I like to mention, just because it opens up the how do you do that conversation and gets the conversation flowing about how we do it, and then what that architecture buys us. I think the multi-writer architecture is what buys us, all the buzzwords that I'm able to throw out around HA, scalability, all those things. So I usually like to tell people envision these nodes, at least starting out in a single region spread across AZs, or maybe for you that you've got data centers on-prem. So maybe this is across different racks, different VMs, whatever that kind of fault tolerance means to you. CockroachDB is actually just a binary if you're managing it yourself. So a lot of flexibility there with how you deploy. But at least in the beginning, I like to keep it simple. 3 nodes, 3 AZs, throw these on an EC2 instance in AWS, and you're good to go. I always like to call out the load balancer, just to, again, reiterate the fact that every node can read and write. We don't care necessarily what node we're connected to talk to the database. The application, the end user is going to talk to Cockroach via the Postgres connection string, just like they're talking to Postgres. A lot more fun things going on under the covers here. Second thing I like to mention after saying every node's a reader and a writer is the data is going to be consistent. We actually are serializable isolation level by default. We work for a long time. We actually do have read committed available now as well, but something I like to highlight after saying, every node can do reads and writes while maintaining consistency. Horizontally scale without downtime. You'll hear me repeat downtime over and over again over the next few slides. It's kind of a pillar of what we do here at Cockroach. Everything is without downtime. So whether you're scaling these across AZs, scaling them across your data center on-prem environment, this is without downtime. And so the important thing to remember here is you can do this, you're increasing your write throughput, your horsepower here, but the application, it really doesn't know if there's 3 nodes behind the scenes or 100 nodes behind the scenes. You're going to talk to it just single logical database as you would normally. And so what is this bias? Handling failures without downtime. This is kind of a disaster scenario. Maybe there's an AZ outage. We're still serving those reads and writes without downtime. Let me actually go back a slide. The same thing goes for planned maintenance. So whether that's upgrades, schema changes, upgrades we actually do in a rolling fashion. We can do that node by node. Schema changes are live. You could even change the primary key if need be. This every node being a reader and a writer really buys us quite a bit of flexibility. We talked about single region scale. We actually also see quite a bit that multi-region requirement. It's not totally clear in this slide, but what we're looking at here across these 9 nodes is actually one CockroachDB cluster. It's still one logical database, but spread across 3 regions in the United States. This kind of architecture is more inclined for people who are looking potentially to survive a regional outage. So in this example, let's say New York goes offline, we can still serve reads and writes from Texas and California. So we have quite a few of our financial customers looking at architectures more like this, or using architectures more like this for that HA story. They need to still have zero downtime, zero data loss in a total regional outage. And then we also see it for actually a GDPR kind of scenario as well. We call this data domiciling, or pinning data to particular regions. And so you could actually say, Morgan's data lives in Texas, Ron's data lives in California, and we could be part of the same, users table. And we're still able to, pin that data where we want, whether it's for compliance purposes or latency purposes. A lot of text here to say we have some different offerings. We are available in the big three cloud providers, of course, AWS. And we do have two different serverless kind of multi-tenant offerings, as well as a dedicated. That would be our advanced. Our advanced tier would be dedicated infrastructure. So some flexibility if you want to manage service. And then CockroachDB self-hosted. Again, this is just a binary. So I always tell people, go crazy, or at least with what you're familiar with, whether that's deploying on Kubernetes on-prem or just VMs. It's how we start to tell the multi-cloud, the hybrid cloud story is, as long as those Cockroach nodes can talk to each other in a secure way, you have a cluster. And so, for some people, that's across 3 data centers that they own. For some people, I've seen, 2 data centers that they own and actually a region in the cloud. So I've seen that before too. So a lot of different offerings that we have. Definitely, binary is easy to get going. Cloud, even easier, I think. All right, so we have covered a whole bunch. This is my best attempt to throw it all on one slide. Again, I apologize a little bit that this is so high level. Like, honestly, I was going through this material and I'm like, this could be a 7-day, all day session, all week session. So there's a lot to unpack. I do appreciate all the questions that I've seen coming in. Hopefully we'll have time to call out a few. But there's a lot to learn. There's still more to learn. So I encourage everyone to reach out to us if you want to dive into some of these things more. Reach out to your AWS representative. Test these things out yourself. That's always encouraged. So again, this is my best attempt to kind of recap where some of the high level things that I see. When it comes to Postgres compatibility, of course, Aurora standard, I think they've done a great job with Postgres compatibility. Limitless, Postgres compatible with some limitations, but more so thinking about shard key considerations. DSQL, I think they still have a little way to catch up here. You'll probably hit quite a few rough edges, at least especially in the preview mode, with the Postgres compatibility. But again, they're in preview. And then CockroachDB, we've kind of, we are not a Postgres fork, but we are Postgres compatible and have pretty good coverage in terms of our Postgres compatibility. Read-write scalability, standard Aurora scales reads very well, harder to scale writes. So where Limitless comes in, can scale reads and writes, but writes via those shard groups. Then Aurora DSQL is more kind of an automatically distributed, and same with Cockroach. Data locality or multi-region is kind of a big one for us. Really don't find a great solution there in any of these three, in my opinion, in terms of pinning data, kind of what I mentioned a few slides ago, where Cockroach has had that built in. I could say this data lives on disk in this region or AZ with just 1 or 2 lines of SQL. So that's a big differentiator for us still. Same with some of the multi-region resilience story. I think DSQL that's where they're leaning in the most. Is this active, high availability across 2 regions. So it's cool to see that they've recognized that as like, hey, we got to start focusing in this area. CockroachDB, we've been focused there for sure for a long time. Not only just 2 regions, but you could go to 3, 4, 5 regions. You could go across clouds. You could go across premises. So that's kind of the regional resilience story. And then lastly, the flexible deployment. Again, I did think it was pretty interesting to see that Limitless and DSQL are serverless only. I'm definitely curious to read more up on that. The serverless multi-tenant nature of them, versus the Aurora where you can't have the dedicated infra. And then, to top it off, CockroachDB does provide a lot of flexibility, whether it's taking that binary, self-hosting it, self-managing it, however you choose, or one of our managed service offerings. So a lot to cover here. I appreciate everyone sticking with me through all these different solutions. I think there's still a lot more to learn, especially as we go over the next couple of years, how Limitless and DSQL evolve over the next few years. Again, I think we're still in the infancy stages, so I can't tell as many stories personally of things I've seen or not seen in the field. This is just a lot of research base that I've done. So excited to do more. We do have some resources here. I think some videos, blogs of us versus Aurora or how to run Cockroach on AWS. Again, I'll keep saying a million times. There's a lot of learning opportunities. Also encourage you to reach out to someone at Cockroach, and I'm always more than happy. Plenty of people on my team love talking about these things, so I always think that's a good next resource. All right, I'm gonna leave. I left 3 minutes for questions, but we'll try to get to as much as we can. All right, so it looks like my team did a pretty good job of answering a lot of the questions. If there's any, I don't know, Ron or Sai, if there was any that like really stuck out that you want to call out, more than happy to do so. Or please come off mute if there's anything that like seemed like a common theme that I can address. I do see something about the consensus algorithm for Aurora. So we actually, CockroachDB uses the Raft protocol. This kind of consensus quorum-based algorithm. I want to say they could be using Paxos, but I'd have to go back and double check what Aurora DSQL is using there. Question about cost. Actually, DSQL, the cost is still in preview. So from what I've seen, at least last I checked in the last couple of days, there's no cost for DSQL yet. So TBD on that. Limitless, I'm not sure. And then, Cockroach, you can check out our cloud offering. That's pretty transparent pricing, or get in contact with our team. The articles provided, are they old or do they cover DSQL? They are older. They're going to be more focused on standard Aurora. We are definitely noting all the DSQL questions. So I would expect to be on the lookout for additional material on a kind of a deeper technical level for some of the DSQL versus Cockroach items. Again, they just announced it last week, and it's still in preview. So I think as much as it's fun to learn about, it's also kind of this fun game of how much testing now versus GA and keeping up to date with all that info. But good question. Definitely more to come. Let's see if there's any other questions worth calling out. Feel free to keep the Q&A going. If you do have any more, we'll run just probably, it looks like a few minutes over if there's any additional questions. I do see a question about, zero downtime, zero data loss in different regions. It's a good question. And I think Thomas, I think I see what you're getting at here. So both Cockroach and DSQL, if you want to survive a regional outage, your writes do have to go to an additional region. So that's a trade-off, right? You want very quick latency, or do you want the high availability? Obviously, we try to provide you the best of both, but the laws of physics say otherwise. So there are trade-offs. So to survive a regional outage, both in Cockroach and DSQL, you actually do have to write to at least one additional region. I will say that we solve it a little bit differently than DSQL does, but that's probably more of a medium to low level dive that we don't have time for today. It's a very good question, though. Good SDK support for different languages. Yeah, so we have a list of supported drivers and tools on our website. Obviously, being around as long as we have now, we've seen a little bit of everything thrown at us. So you will use Postgres drivers in those cases for talking to Cockroach. It's not a Cockroach driver, so you actually do just use the Postgres driver. Let's just take a couple more here. How does locking differ between Aurora Postgres? So this is a deep conversation. I would expect to read more or see more material on this in the next few months to a year. Very deep technical topic on locking. So I mentioned that DSQL uses optimistic concurrency control. CockroachDB is more on the pessimistic side. There's a lot more material to read up on that. Again, I can't cover it all today, but there's trade-offs there too, right? Versus optimistic versus pessimistic. More to learn, more to come there. But good question. All right, I think that about covers all the questions, or at least that we have time for. Again, there will be a survey after we wrap up here, so please take the time to fill that out. I do appreciate all the questions. I'm sorry, there's a lot of material and in a very short amount of time, but hopefully I'll get the chance to meet some of you, or someone on my team can, and we can talk through some of this material more. It would be very much appreciated. So thanks again for the time. Stick around for the survey, and we'll catch you all next time. Thank you.